We're halfway through the fantasy football regular season, and we're heading into a crucial week where we'll need plenty of replacements in our lineups with 6 teams on a bye week. Injuries aren't stopping anytime soon. I'm John Macri, and joined as always by PFF's lead fantasy analyst, Nathan Jahnke. And for this episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast, we'll be going over all of the top available waiver wire targets heading into week 8. Nate, how are you doing coming off a late Monday Night Football doubleheader?
Doing well, not quite as much sleep as I'd like, but it's a fun day for waivers. I'm looking forward to going through all my leagues and doing my waiver runs today. Interesting week because, like you said, we have lots of injuries. We have 6 teams on bye week this upcoming week. It's the only week of the season where we have 6 teams on bye week. So a lot of fantasy managers are going to be desperate for players, along with having players to replace those players on buys. It's the usual, here's the players who played well this week, who could continue to play well going forward. And we are also inching closer and closer to the NFL trade deadline. NFL trade rumors are intensifying. There's only 2 weeks left for teams to make trades. So it's good to get ahead of some of these trades. And so you can get a player before everyone else wants that player. So a lot of interesting names for various reasons on the waiver wire list this week.
Yeah, it'll be a fun one. We got lots of guys to go over here. And yeah, you said this is the only week. Did we have 2 weeks last year where there were 6 teams on bye, or am I missing?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's good. We only got 1 this year, which is nice, like, considering it takes out so many of our fantasy options. Yeah, Arizona, Detroit, Jacksonville, the Rams, the Raiders, and the Seahawks all going to be on a bye this week. So going to be busy on the waiver wire. So make sure that you pay attention here, because we got lots of names to go in through. But yeah, if you want to check the waiver wire article, which Nate has written up on pff.com, you could do that right now and get access to that with a PFF Plus subscription. And if you use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25, you will get 25% off of that PFF Plus subscription. And that'll get you access to all of Nate's rankings and articles and tools, the PFF grades as well. All of that stuff you'll get access to with the PFF Plus subscription. If you use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25, you could even save when you do that. Otherwise, feel free to like, subscribe, hype up the channel as well. If you're watching here on the YouTube, it really helps us a ton, and we definitely appreciate that as well. But Nate, we'll get into it here, and we are going to start with our quarterbacks as we always do. And we got to start where we have in each of the past few weeks, really, with Jackson Dart, because even though I'm surprised he didn't cross that 50% rostership threshold after last week, it means we at least get to talk about him for 1 more week, which is fun, because Dart is fun. And not only is he, I'd say, a worthy waiver wire target, but potentially a weekly fantasy starting option going forward, Nate.
Yeah, luckily, not a lot of fantasy managers have needed quarterbacks in recent weeks. And even this week with 6 teams on bye weeks, there's not a ton of the quarterbacks that are usually in fantasy starting lineups on buys this week. So luckily, there shouldn't be too many teams that need a quarterback, but you could still look to upgrade the position. And there's a decent chance that Dart would be an upgrade. He's just been a weekly fantasy starter every week that he has been in the Giants starting lineup. The first couple weeks of the season that he was a starter, it was a lot of his work on the run, gaining at least 50 yards in each of his first 3 games. Didn't do as much in the run game this week, but he was facing a strong Denver Broncos defense. Threw for 3 touchdowns, 283 yards, threw an interception in there, had under 50% completion percentage. So while it wasn't the most effective game passing the ball, it still led to a lot of fantasy production. A decent amount of his production so far this season has been through touchdowns, so there is room for some regression, but Dart's been like the middle of quarterback 1 range over his 4 weeks as a starter. So even with some regression, he should be still a borderline fantasy starter going forward. Faces the Philadelphia Eagles next week. They just played them like 2 weeks ago. It was one of his games where he had over 50 yards, had a touchdown on the ground and in the air, I believe, that week. So if he has a repeat performance against Philadelphia, you can have him in your starting lineup for another week.
Yeah, it's crazy how good he's been, really, for fantasy. And I think, like you said, the most impressive part against the Denver Broncos defense last week, setting a new career high in passing yards and passing touchdowns. And then he did add like another rushing touchdown on the ground as well, right? So he's got 3 rushing touchdowns in his 4 starts this year, which is pretty impressive. So Yeah, I don't think we're talking about Dart on here next week, or maybe for the rest of the year. So yeah, make sure you guys are getting Jackson Dart off your waiver wire, especially again, even 6 teams on bye, guys like Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford, who have been really solid for us, Sam Darnold as well. There's a nice replacement here in Jackson Dart if you can get him. And like you said, Nate, going against the Eagles, he had a top 5 fantasy performance against the Eagles in week 6. So definitely some value there. Next up, though, another quarterback that I bet a lot of people kicking themselves for not listening to us about last week, Nate. Joe Flacco, now of the Cincinnati Bengals. All he did was put up 342 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns on Thursday night. Nate, is elite Flacco back?
I don't know if he'll be elite, but he knows how to throw to his elite wide receivers, and that's all he
That's
needs
for
to
sure.
do. So, uh, we've been talking about Flacco for a while here because the Bengals have an excellent schedule over the rest of the season, and that started last week. He had a great matchup and was able to take advantage of it. And the Bengals have the best schedule for quarterbacks over the rest of the season. 6 of their next 9 opponents in the top 10 and allowing fantasy points to quarterbacks this season, including each of the next 3 matchups. So he has great matchup after great matchup after great matchup, even in the fantasy playoffs, facing 2 of the top 3 teams at allowing fantasy points to quarterbacks in the playoffs, as well as a third good matchup for him. So he can be in fantasy starting lineups in a lot of weeks. I know we kind of talk about him week after week, and we probably talk about more of the same guys week after week compared to other waiver wire shows who go more after the players who just had a big game. But the reason is we look ahead, look at the schedule, look at what could be happening going forward. And Flacco was one of these examples where, yeah, we've been talking about him for a while because we knew he'd eventually get there, and he got there last week. And we think he can continue to do good things over the rest of the season. So Flacco is someone I would definitely be looking to pick up, even if I don't need a quarterback. As long as I have a roster spot for another quarterback, maybe I don't want 3 quarterbacks on my roster if I have 2 other good options. But Flacco's been moving up my rest of season rankings basically every single week.
Yeah, he's been great, right? Like even if you just compare, his time in Cleveland and Cincinnati so far this year, like looking at the passing grade first, like 61.1 passing grade in Cleveland through 4 games, 82.4 passing grade in Cincinnati in 2 games, just 2 passing touchdowns in 4 games with the Browns, 5 passing touchdowns in 2 games with the Bengals, 6 interceptions, 6 turnover worthy plays in Cleveland, 0 interceptions, 0 turnover worthy plays in Cincinnati. So look, obviously different opponents, different circumstances, but it's those circumstances that we like, right? When you have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins to throw to, that's a massive advantage for a competent quarterback like Flacco. And so far, so good for the Bengals and for fantasy purposes as well. Next up, Nate, Minnesota Vikings quarterback, not Carson Wentz, but JJ McCarthy, who might be coming back soon here.
Oh, yeah, the Vikings play on Thursday Night Football, so I'm not sure if McCarthy is going to come back specifically for this week. So if you need a quarterback for this week, I might look elsewhere. But I am banking on the fact that I think McCarthy will be the starter for Minnesota again once he is fully healthy. If the Vikings decide to go with Carson Wentz over the rest of the season, then I'd substitute Carson Wentz in here. But the Vikings, a lot of their upcoming opponents haven't had great luck recently, whether it's injuries or just having some bad games in there. So I've been looking at the rest of season schedules, and the Vikings schedule keeps looking better and better each week. The next, 9 opponents are in the top half of the league in allowing fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So a lot of good matchups for the Vikings going forward. So it's going back to a lot of the things I thought at the beginning of the season with the Vikings offense. It's a great situation for quarterbacks. Even Wentz has had some success so far this season. I would say a lot of the Vikings struggles on offense have probably mostly been related to the offensive line and the number of injuries they've had. But a lot of the players are either playing through injury now rather than being out, or about to come back sooner rather than later. So I think the Vikings offensive line should be improving. Aaron Jones should be back. I believe that he could very well be back for Thursday Night Football to also help the passing game as well. So I could see the Vikings offense being much improved over the second half of the season, like we thought it would be at the beginning of the season. So I still think there's a chance McCarthy has an excellent second half of the season if he is fully healthy.
Definitely, right? Like, I mean, Wentz, like you said, he's had some success there. He's been putting up a lot of passing yards, at least already over 1,000 yards in four starts. And I know McCarthy wasn't quite on pace with that, with like under 160 yards in his two games, but could be a nice turnaround here once he's back and after he's healthy. Like you said, a lot of pieces in place there for some quarterback fantasy goodness. And then last quarterback on the list today, Michael Penix Jr. of the Atlanta Falcons. Six teams on bye. Again, injuries piling up. Penix draws a nice matchup against the Miami Dolphins in week 8, Nate. I know he picked up, I think it was like a bone bruise or something on his foot, so we'll see if he's able to go, but otherwise could be a nice streaming option here in week 8.
Oh yeah, keep an eye on the injury report. Penix has been kind of up and down this season, hasn't been quite as consistent as we'd like to see, but specifically this matchup against the Miami Dolphins, I think he can find a lot of success against. The Dolphins have allowed plenty of fantasy points to quarterbacks this season, including this past week. So I think Penix can have a good week if you are looking for a quarterback. I would still probably look at the quarterbacks we talked about at the top of the show. But if those quarterbacks are gone and you need someone, Penix is the player that I would turn to for this week.
Yeah, Dolphins allowing 7.9 passing yards per attempt. That's a bottom 5 mark in the league, which is good for opposing quarterbacks, obviously. They're also allowing an above average touchdown rate against through the air. So, yeah, no Goff, no Lawrence, no Stafford, no Darnold, no Geno, no Kyler this week. Penix could be a fine streaming option here. Before we get into the running backs, I want to let everybody know that this episode is brought to you by Fabric by Gerber Life. Parenting is filled with high pressure decisions, and it can be difficult to tell if you've made the right choice for your kid's future. But here's a simple decision you can make today that could have a meaningful impact on your kid's future. Opening a UGMA kids investment account with Fabric to start their investment journey early and give them a financial head start. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kids investment account from Fabric, you could start investing in your child's future today. It's all online, and setting up an account could take you just 5 minutes. Get started investing with as little as $1 a day, then manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. There are no contribution limits, multiple tax advantages, and they're SIPC insured up to $500,000, plus no commission fees and just a low flat monthly maintenance fee. Fabric has partnered with Gerber Life, trusted by millions of families like yours for over 50 years. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL, MEET fabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, Nate, let's talk some running backs now. And starting us off this week is a familiar name from weeks past, but not, and now a potential top option here as his role kind of grows here, and that's Kyle Monangai of the Chicago Bears.
Oh, yeah. Ben Johnson has a history of using two running backs during his time with Detroit. We weren't quite seeing that at the start of the season. It was pretty clear that DeAndre Swift was the lead running back for Chicago at the start of the season. But in recent weeks, they've gotten closer and closer to a 50-50 backfield, more like what we saw in Detroit, even though they didn't have quite as strong of roles. Typically in Detroit, we saw an early down back and a late down back. This is just the two running backs kind of sharing a lot of the same roles. This past week, Swift played 36 snaps. Monangai played 31 snaps. It was pretty evenly split on early downs. Monangai played slightly more on third downs, but not much. Both saw snaps at the goal line, snaps in short yardage situations. So these two backs have been interchangeable, and this has helped the Chicago Bears offense. DeAndre Swift has been much more effective these past 2 weeks than previous weeks. So on the downside, I don't think Monangai is necessarily going to take over as the lead running back anytime soon in Chicago, but we saw plenty of times where the two running backs in Detroit were fantasy relevant and at the same time, and there's a chance that can happen in Chicago. And specifically in the short term, with 6 teams on bye weeks this week, 4 teams on bye weeks the following week, the Bears play the Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals, which are the two teams that have allowed the most fantasy points to running backs this season. So as long as they keep doing this 50-50 split, we could see Monangai be a top 24 fantasy running back each of these next 2 weeks because of the opponent and because of the number of teams on bye weeks. While there weren't that many great quarterback options on bye weeks this week, there are lots of running backs that are typically in fantasy starting lineups that are on bye weeks this week. So there are going to be a number of fantasy managers. Hopefully, a lot of them have players on their bench that they can turn to, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's at least a few people looking towards a waiver wire. And if you need a running back specifically this week, Monangai could be your best option.
Yeah, and getting some of those high value touches as well, right? Especially this past week, 2 goal to go carries on the week. He scored on one of them. He only had 1 goal to go carry coming into this game, but they also haven't exactly had a ton of goal to go rushing opportunities on the year. So maybe that starts improving for the offense and for him as well, and leads to some of the more of these high value fantasy opportunities for Monangai, and you could get some touchdown luck out of that as well. But speaking of running backs, actually, who are getting decent work in their backfield and in the red zone and around the goal line as well, Tyler Algier continues to kind of be, a little bit of a thorn in the side of Bijan Robinson managers as he's, getting some of those goal to go carries in his offense. But maybe those deeper leagues, like you've been saying, they can get some value out of Algier here for that same reason. At the very least, a high end handcuff here in Atlanta.
Oh yeah, his role has not changed in Atlanta these past 2 seasons. He's been the clear backup. Playing time kind of depends on the game script. If the Falcons are winning games, then we start to see more Algier. If they're losing games, then we see a lot more Robinson. So Algier very much game script dependent. He's also typically been available in roughly around 65% of ESPN leagues. I doubt he's available in too many 12-team leagues, but should be available in some 10-team leagues. And he has always been probably the top handcuff option, and that if Bijan Robinson were to suffer an injury at any point this season, then Algier would be the clear replacement. An argument could be made for me to have Algier on this list every single week because he's available in over 50% of leagues and he is the top handcuff option. But I'm sure he's only available in some of the leagues that you are in. But I would specifically want him outside of his handcuff value, specifically for this week. Talked about it with Penix. They're playing the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins have been losing most of their games so far this season. Some of them have been pretty big wins. So I could see the Falcons being able to score a lot of points against Miami. Algier averaging double-digit carries whenever the Falcons are winning, both this year and last year. It's been 14 carries per win so far this season. So I think Algier is another one of those players that, yeah, he's not at the top of the depth chart, but if you are desperate for a running back this week, he is probably among the top options, at least in those 10-team leagues. Or if you
For sure.
had him on your bench, then you can probably start him as well.
Yeah, agreed. I think I've covered him a few times in the weekly Red Zone Report article as well, because Algier getting a big workload once they get into scoring position. And it's kind of hurting Bijan's value a little bit, which is crazy to say because Bijan has been an elite fantasy option, but it could be even better, right? But Bijan did score through the air this week, but just giving him maybe more touches in the red zone would obviously be huge. Plus, coming into this week, I think the Falcons ranked like dead last in red zone offensive success rate, if I remember correctly. I wrote that in the article, but yeah, maybe giving Bijan more help or more touches there would help. But yeah, they don't want to. So that's Tyler Algier getting a little more valuable because of it. So next up is Bam Knight. He took 14 carries on and 4 targets as well. Decent workload kind of continued this week, Nate, in Arizona, maybe creating a little bit more of a gap between him and Michael Carter.
Yeah, he was the clear lead running back this game. Michael Carter was the backup on early downs. They got Dearness Johnson, who had been the third down back for Jacksonville these past couple seasons. He came up off the practice squad and was their third down back this week. But Knight was the clear runner. Wasn't the most successful day by the Arizona run game, and Arizona has a bye week this week. So if you need a running back specifically for this week, Knight definitely isn't an option. But the week after that, they play the Dallas Cowboys. Cowboys have allowed plenty of fantasy points to running backs. So if you're looking ahead a week and know that you need a running back in week 9, then Knight is someone that I would consider. After that, Trey Benson's at least eligible to return from injured reserve. Whether or not he'll be ready to return immediately once he's eligible, that's yet to be seen. So Knight is only an option specifically for week 9, maybe a week or two after that as well, but only if you need a running back for those weeks. But I think Knight will be a fine option if your running back has a bye week in week 9 and you have the luxury of looking ahead and knowing what you need that week and picking up Knight now rather than waiting a week.
Nice. I like it. All right, let's get into some handcuffs now, Nate. And we'll start with Isaiah Davis on the New York Jets, available in close to or a little bit over 95% of leagues right now.
Yeah, we've talked about him for a little bit because he's been the number 2 running back for the Jets. Since Braylon Allen went down with injury, Davis has been the clear number 2 option. Basically, no one else is seeing the field outside of him and Brees Hall. And the Jets haven't won a game yet. That's led to the trade rumors around Brees Hall intensifying. As long as Brees Hall is on the roster and healthy, Isaiah Davis does not have any fantasy value. But if Hall has an injury, then Davis would be the clear lead running back. Or if Hall gets traded, which I think is possible, the Jets don't have a chance of making the playoffs basically at this point. Even if they win every game the rest of the season, there's a chance they could miss the playoffs. But um, Hall is in the last year of his contract. If they don't want to sign him long term, then it makes sense to trade him now so they get draft picks for him for this next year rather than having to wait another year for compensatory picks that they can get a compensatory pick for him. So it makes sense to trade him if they're not going to sign him to a long-term contract. I could see it making sense for the Jets to sign him to a long-term contract because Hall has played pretty well so far this season, but they could also get more value for a trade and start rebuilding early. So I'd pick up Davis now just in case Hall gets traded in the next 2 weeks. And if Hall does not get traded, then I'd be fine dropping Davis at that point.
Nice. I like it. And then next up, Nate, the Tennessee Titans run game has been not great so far, but they got Tyjae Spears back recently, who led the team in rushing yards this past week with a whopping 22 yards. But it's still more effective than Pollard was on the ground this week. Just kind of a messy offense right now in Tennessee, but maybe we could squeeze some fantasy value out of Tyjae Spears here at some point.
Yeah, Tennessee has basically changed how they're rotating the two running backs every week since Spears has been back. So the fact that they haven't had any kind of consistency in how they're using the two running backs yet means there's a chance that Spears could be the lead running back at some point this season. They could decide to try that, even though I think Pollard's been fine given his opportunities and the offensive line and the offense in general. They could want to try something new and see what Spears can do as a lead running back at some point this season. I've also seen at least some rumors connecting Pollard in trades. I could see that happening as well this season. I haven't seen quite as much of the big national reporters including Pollard in trade. They've included plenty of other Titans players. But the Titans are a team that's rebuilding. They fired their head coach recently, so they're clearly playing for the future rather than this year at this point. So Pollard does have 2 years left on his contract. But they can move on from him and get a decent amount of cap space rather than dead money on their salary. So I could see them moving on if they're ready to start looking ahead to the future, considering Pollard's on the older side for a running back right now.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch some of these teams like this near the trade deadline here. Hopefully they make some moves, kind of, spice things up a little bit, make it exciting for us. And hopefully even if not, maybe we could start to see some shift towards Spears in that backfield, because somebody's got to emerge there, hopefully. But next, Nate, is another handcuff here, and that is Baishal Tootin in Jacksonville. Jags are heading into a bye week after losing to the Rams on Sunday morning in the international game there. But do you think his role has a chance here to grow coming out of the bye week?
Yeah, it's been growing a little bit here and there in recent weeks. Travis Etienne hasn't played quite as good as he did early on in the season. I don't think the Jaguars will be trading Etienne, so Tootin would have to beat out Etienne for the starting job in order to have a lot of fantasy value. But in terms of efficiency, they've been pretty close to even. There have been some metrics where Tootin's been better, some where Etienne's played better. But the fact that Etienne's quality of play has declined a little bit led to Tootin getting a little bit more action this week. And with the bye week, there's a chance that they decide to move even closer to a 50-50 backfield. So Tootin's obviously someone you can't start this week because they're on the bye week. And then after that, I probably still don't want him quite in my starting lineup yet. But there's only so many backfields where you could picture the backup running back potentially becoming the starter without an injury. And I think this is one of those backfields where there's at least a chance that it happens at some point over the rest of the season.
Yeah, for sure. And then lastly, the usual Taj Brooks handcuff in Cincinnati option here to wrap us up at the running back position, Nate.
Yeah, there's been Brooks has not seen any playing time on offense outside of the 1 week where Samaje Perine suffered an injury. But I do think if Chase Brown were to suffer an injury at some point this season, then Brooks would be the main running back for Cincinnati on early downs, with Perine continuing to take the third down and 2-minute drill role. And the Bengals have the best schedule for running backs over the rest of the season, similar to having the best schedule for quarterbacks. It's not a great schedule for them in the short term, but specifically from weeks 13 to week 17, they play the 2nd, the 7th, the 2nd, the 5th, and the 9th teams at allowing fantasy points to running backs this season. So 5 straight top 10 matchups, some even better than top 10 matchups. So if Brown were to suffer an injury anytime over the next month or so, Brooks has an opportunity to be a league winner. But if Brown stays healthy, then Brooks won't have any fantasy value this year.
Nice. All right. Before we go to the wide receivers, I want to let you guys know that this episode is brought to you by DraftKings. What's your favorite touchdown of all time? There's over 100 years of touchdowns to pick from. For me, it's the next one, because with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, every touchdown could bring you closer to cashing in. DraftKings Sportsbook delivers the unmatched intensity of the NFL right to your fingertips. From first touchdown scored or anytime touchdown props or the thrill of live in-game betting, every snap is loaded with opportunity. And here's the best part: new customers can bet $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets instantly. Talking to the great Mason Cameron over here at PFF, who's on the PFF betting show every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern on the PFF YouTube channel. Looking at some of the early lines here on DraftKings, you're looking at Thursday Night Football, the Minnesota Vikings and the Los Angeles Chargers. The Vikings are +3 against the Chargers right now. The Chargers have failed to cover their last 4 games as favorites. So you're looking at the Chargers offensive line. Obviously, injuries are piling up here. Joe Alt might be back, but might not be enough there to save their the amount of pressure that Justin Herbert has been under, and he's at just a 61.4 passing grade under pressure this year, Justin Herbert. So we know Minnesota Vikings defense under Brian Flores can utilize the blitz quite a bit. So there could be an option there for you if you want to get in on DraftKings, some of the early lines. Otherwise, head to the PFF betting show every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern on the PFF YouTube channel to find more, because your team hitting pay dirt pays out to you. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code PFF. That's code PFF for new customers to turn $5 into $300 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hill Casino Resort, Kansas. Pass-through of per wager tax may apply in Illinois. 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Best bet must win to receive bonus bets, which expire in 7 days. Minimum odds required. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio. Limited time offer. Okay, Nate, wide receiver time now. And starting up at the top, a player who we've talked about a lot before, Alec Pierce of the Indianapolis Colts. His rostership still below 5%, and he took that personally this week.
Yeah, it was nice this week having a number of guys that we've talked about several weeks and having good weeks. Pierce is another example of that. He caught 5 passes for 98 yards, led the Colts in receiving. Have talked about his unique role in this Colts offense before, and that he's the X receiver, he's the deep threat, has a very high average depth of target, while the other Colts receivers, Tyler Warren, Michael Pittman, and Josh Downs, all competing for those short targets. Most weeks, Downs was out with injury this past week, but because Pierce has that unique role, he's been consistently a part of the offense. When you look at the fantasy producers on the waiver wire, he's among the top of the league. And it's interesting in that he hasn't scored a touchdown yet. A lot of the deep threats, players who have the X role have a high average depth of target. They tend to have a couple of those plays where they catch these big catches for touchdowns. That's where a lot of their fantasy value comes, and that hasn't been the case with Pierce so far this season. It's just been a couple of big plays each game, but he hasn't found the end zone. I think that will change over time with some regression. He should catch some touchdowns over the rest of the year, which should make his fantasy value be even better than what it's been so far this season, which is part of what pushes him to the top of the list. Also has a nice matchup this week against the Tennessee Titans. Generally favorable schedule over the rest of the year, but a particularly favorable schedule from weeks 14 to 17. So right when you need him for the fantasy playoffs. So I think Pierce is a very good option. Yeah, there will be a couple weeks over the rest of the season where he doesn't produce because it's the other wide receivers or tight end, or they just run the ball too much for him to produce. But I'm comfortable with Pierce potentially in my fantasy starting lineup, and also the fact that he could have some big games over the rest of the season with those deep catches, and hopefully he has a game where he catches a touchdown or two and helps you win your matchup.
Yeah, playing him for the upside, right? Because like you said, that deep role, it can be absolutely valuable, and there's room for positive regression for sure. I mean, he's second in the league in average depth of target right now at 21.1, getting a decent workload overall, like 27 targets in 5 games, Daniel Jones willing to chuck it up to him, and it's been working. So yeah, we love these high value targets for fantasy, especially when there's a little bit more than just deep shots with him. It did help that Josh Downs was out this week, sure, but we've been talking about Pierce and that role, which has kind of been the key here. So really like that one. And then last week's wide receiver headliner also delivered a nice game this week, finding the end zone again. That's Kayshon Boutte of the now 5-2 New England Patriots.
Yeah, I also want to note that this week with bye weeks, we got Puka Nacua, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, Amon-Ra St. Brown on bye weeks. We had lots of injuries. We had another 2 wide receiver injuries last night. So you're going to have to be aggressive on the waiver wire at wide receiver because a lot of fantasy managers are going to be fighting over these wide receivers. Kayshon's another one of these X receivers who's a deep threat. He has been scoring the touchdown so far this season, unlike Pierce. So if you look at all the wide receivers available on the waiver wire, the only ones who have scored more fantasy points per game is Malik Neighbors, who is out for the season, and Hollywood Brown, who has been slowly but surely falling down the Chiefs depth chart with Rashee Rice back. Xavier Worthy was out for a little bit in there, so Brown is not as valuable as he was before, where Kayshon has been consistently the Patriots' top receiver in terms of playing time, has had that consistent role as their X receiver so far this season, has been making some of those big plays. So while I think because the fact that he has been a little bit more touchdown dependent, I'm a little more hesitant to want him on my fantasy lineup. It's worth remembering he's still only 23 years old, still relatively young in the league, and the Patriots offense is improving. So a chance that he could just become a more reliable part of the offense, maybe becomes this player who starts to see up to 10 targets on a more regular basis. So while I think he is a risky play at the present, I think there's a chance that he improves over the second half of the year and can become that more consistent option for the Patriots offense.
Yeah, that Patriots offense kind of been the key right now, right? Like Drake May has looked awesome, so there's going to be beneficiaries from that, and right now Boutte is emerging as a fairly consistent option, at least because of the touchdowns, 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games. So it could be absolutely a nice rest of season outlook for him if he continues to be a big part of an improving offense there. And then Nate, next up, Troy Franklin is back. He scored a touchdown this week, even if it wasn't meant for him. But a little accidental score was nice for those of us who had no choice but to put him in a lineup. But yeah, it doesn't happen if he's not out there, and he is at least out there, Nate.
Oh, yeah, he's been pretty consistently around 62, 63% of offensive snaps these past couple weeks, which isn't as much as you would like to see for a wide receiver, but it's the most consistent we've seen from a Broncos receiver outside of Cortland Sutton this season. Did have a ton of targets this week, even though they weren't able to connect on a lot of those targets. So even though it was Marvin Mims who had the big week among the Broncos wide receivers, I still trust Franklin more because his role has been more consistent. Because the Broncos were playing from behind in this game, it led them to use their passing formations more. And meant Mims was on the field more often. Evan Ingram was on the field more often. But I think in games where the Broncos were very competitive in the fourth quarter, but I think games where they are closer throughout the game, we will see Mims not play as much. We will see Evan Ingram not play as much, which is why Franklin is still the one that I trust the most out of these Broncos wide receivers outside of Cortland Sutton. And specifically this week, they play the Dallas Cowboys. Dallas has a ton of fantasy points to wide receivers so far this season. So while Franklin might not be someone I want every single week because his playing time isn't as good as it was at the start of the season, specifically if you need a wide receiver for this week, the matchup is excellent for him. So there's a chance he could have a big game this week.
Yeah, for sure. And look, Bo Nix, for to his credit, like he's always throwing it to him. It's just not they're just not always connecting, right? Like it's either drops or misses. But again, playing time and the target rate, it's there for Franklin, and maybe in some of these nicer matchups we could get some more value out of him. But next up, we talked about this Titans offense already and how someone has to emerge. I don't know if they'll, get to a point where more than one emerges as fantasy relevant this season, but there are options vying for that spot. And Alec Iomanner is one of them, Nate.
Oh, yeah, Alec, he hasn't had the big game recently, but he is someone where he's had the playing time. His playing time has been increasing, in part because Calvin Ridley has been injured, but he saw a season high in terms of offensive snaps this week. And I could very well see him having a big second half of the season, because anytime that you can get a rookie wide receiver who is seeing very significant playing time, even if they don't have that production in the first half of the season, we've seen players break out over the second half of the season. Amon-Ra St. Brown instantly comes to mind because they were both fourth round picks. St. Brown was basically doing the exact same thing as Ayumanor over the first half of his rookie season. Alex averaging zero point 0.1 more receiving yards per game than Amon-Ra St. Brown was over the first 12 weeks of St. Brown's rookie season. And then St. Brown was among the top fantasy wide receivers over the past 6 weeks of his rookie year. So I think there's a chance that he breaks out. It's also worth mentioning DK, who had the big game this week out of the slot, wasn't as high on him when this article first came out because Tyler Lockett was still rotating in the slot, but there was announced that Lockett will be getting released, which will lead to an increase in playing time for DK. So he is also an option in deeper leagues, but he is only playing in the slot in 3 wide receiver sets. So his role will not be as consistent as Alex will. So would still take a Ayumanor rest of season. But in some of these deeper leagues where DK is available, he is also worth considering because he should see a fairly significant increase in playing time going forward with Tyler Lockett no longer on the roster.
Yeah, that's huge for Chimere DK for sure. And then, like you said, yeah, playing in the slot. But I think Tennessee was first in 11 personnel rate this season, if I remember correctly. At least heading into this week, they were. So could be a nice role there for both of these guys. Again, somebody has to emerge here in Tennessee at some point. We also got a huge game from Xavier Legette in Carolina this past week, despite literally everyone hoping that it would be Tetra McMillan or Jalen Coker. No, it was Xavier Legette with 11 targets this week. So can we trust it, Nate?
I don't know if we can trust it, but the fact that he had this big game and he's a former first round pick, I'm not expecting him to continue to have good games, but there's always a chance that this is the point where he turns his career around. And I'd rather pick him up now in case that happens rather than have him have another big game and then make it impossible for him to pick up later. So I think it's worth taking a chance on him just because he's that first round pick who did play well in college, and this is a Panthers offense where we think a second receiver can emerge. Still think a chance that it's Coker, but at least in this week, Legette was still the clear lead Z receiver where Coker was just playing in the slot. Luckily, Coker's playing time increased as the game went on, so it looks like Coker's playing time should be decent going forward. But if they keep using Legette in 2 wide receiver sets as well as 3 wide receiver sets and only use Coker in 3 wide receiver sets, that gives the advantage to Legette going forward. So we'll see how he plays and if he's able to have another good game, because this was the clear best game of his career so far. But I think it's worth keeping an eye on him just in case. I don't think it's like some other games where a wide receiver just has a really good catch, like DK's performance this past week. It was mostly 1 reception that led to a touchdown. That was most of his receiving yards. So not expecting that to necessarily continue. But with Legette, it was a lot of catches for a decent amount of yards. So the fact that it was a significant number of receptions, a significant number of yards, that makes it a little more likely that he'll be able to continue doing this going forward.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, it's possible Bryce Young misses this week as well, right? I think there's a chance that Andy Dalton is going to be the starter here for Carolina. So we'll see if that's better or worse for the fantasy value of our passing options in Carolina. But yeah, that'll be one to keep an eye out for sure. And then next up, Nate, the Commanders wide receiver duo of not Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel because they're both hurt, but Chris Moore and Jalen Lane are the next guys up here.
Oh, yeah, Washington without their top 3 wide receivers. Noah Brown also landed on injured reserve recently. So that meant the Commanders went with their 4th, 5th, and 6th wide receivers this week. Chris Moore would be the X receiver. So specifically, if Terry McLaurin misses another game, Chris Moore would be an option. And if Deebo Samuel misses another game, then Jalen Lane would be an option. I know I was in some leagues where I was looking for wide receivers at the end of the week, and it was all the injury replacement wide receivers who were at the top of who are the top options. So was deciding between Washington Commanders wide receivers in some leagues last week. I think it's also worth mentioning the Houston Texans wide receivers here with Nico Collins suffering that concussion last night. Decent chance Collins misses this upcoming week because it's a shorter week for them because they played on Monday Night Football. So Xavier Hutchinson, Jaden Higgins, Higgins a little less likely to be available, but I think both wide receivers will see an increase in playing time as the two clear outside receivers for Houston this week. So another option if you're in those deeper leagues and just need a wide receiver who is starting this week. I think those options in Washington and Houston might be your best options in those deeper leagues.
Yeah, and it's another passing offense we'll have to keep an eye on too, because Jaden Daniels hurt again here, but possibly going to miss this game with the hamstring injury, right? So just again, more guys just getting killed by injuries here. Really frustrating stuff, but we got lots of waiver wire options here to hopefully replace them, or at least be a band-aid for a week here and keep things afloat for our fantasy rosters. But you have Las Vegas Raiders rookie wide receiver Jack Besh on the list this week. Not necessarily a player who did anything this week, but another guy who maybe sees a larger opportunity should there be like a trade of some sort with Jacoby Myers, the subject of trade rumors these days.
Oh, yeah. Myers was out this week with injury. So we also got to see what this offense would look like if Myers was traded. The Raiders offense was not very successful in general, which wasn't great to see, had the fewest offensive plays that we have seen in the history of PFF data. So that wasn't great for the Raiders offense, but we did see Dante Thornton move back to the X receiver role. And then Besh played more of that Jacoby Myers role of Z receiver and slot receiver, which is what Jack was playing in college. So even though that didn't lead to a ton of success because no one in the Raiders offense had a ton of success, this is more the role that he played in college. So I think a role where he could be successful. I was kind of rotating with Trey Tucker, which wide receiver was in the slot on any given play. So I think he and Tucker would be a little interchangeable in this offense if Jacoby Myers is traded. So I probably don't want him in my lineup if Myers remains on the roster going forward. But another player where if Myers does get traded, he would be the player that would be picked up in a lot of leagues off the waiver wire. So I'd rather take a chance and pick him up now before Myers gets traded. And then if Myers doesn't get traded, then just drop him in 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, at the very least, the Raiders should be playing more than whatever it was, 35 offensive snaps each week going forward. That was absolutely crazy, especially for us IDP gamers who had Kansas City Chiefs full-time players who they even got rested in garbage time in that game. So they played like 25 snaps, which was brutal. So yeah, hopefully no more of that stuff going forward from the Raiders. But and then, yeah, we also have our last wide receiver here on the waiver target list. It was a waiver wire star from last year when he was with the Broncos, now of the New Orleans Saints. Devon Vele makes the list. What was the thinking in including Vele this week, Nate?
This is another one of those trade deadline things where Adam Schefter put out a list of around 30 players he thought would be available for trade. That included 6 wide receivers, and 3 of those 6 wide receivers were Saints wide receivers, the top 3 on the depth chart, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, and Brandon Cooks. So if any one of those 3 wide receivers gets traded from New Orleans, it would be Vele, who starts to see a lot more playing time in those 3 wide receiver sets. He at least has had more production per snap than Brandon Cook so far this season. So a chance that if Shaheed, for example, was the wide receiver to get traded, Bailey could become the second receiving option in this offense going forward. I'm not expecting Olave to get traded. There's been some more recent reports suggesting that the Saints are trying to get a long-term contract with Olave, but also Olave has that concussion history where he suffered at least 6 concussions in his playing career. That makes him more susceptible to having another concussion. And if he does suffer a concussion, that would mean he'd be out for a more significant period of time than most players who suffer concussions. So a chance that the Saints trade one of these wide receivers and Olave gets injured, in which case Pele would be the top Saints wide receiver over the rest of the season. So even though I'm not expecting much in the short term for him, there's a chance the Saints don't trade anyone. There's a barely decent chance that Olave doesn't suffer another concussion this season. So a lot of ifs that need to happen for Bailey to be fantasy relevant, but there's a chance that Bailey could be seeing double-digit targets in weeks after 1 or 2 of these things happen. So if you're in one of these deeper leagues and are looking for a player to take a shot on who could have a big second half of the season, Bailey is someone that I think is worth taking that shot on.
Nice. I like it. All right, let's wrap up with the tight ends. And one of the absolute stars of week 7, rookie tight end for the Chargers, Oron Gadsden. We've talked about him before. The needle, didn't move much in terms of his rostership from last week to this week, but he just put up 164 receiving yards and a touchdown with Keenan Allen, Ladd McConkey, and Quentin Johnston all active. That's 2 games in a row now, Nate, that he's been a big part of this Chargers passing offense.
Yeah, he was one of those players that throughout training camp, throughout mini camps, there was a constant buzz about him. And then it was disappointing to see him as a healthy and active the first 2 weeks of the season. And then it took Will Dissly's injury in order for him to start seeing playing time, but his playing time has increased every single week. Typically, what we saw with this Chargers offense last year is that there would be a clear tight end for early downs and a clear tight end for late downs. And Gadsden was playing in all those situations this week, was playing at least 70% of snaps, and 11 personnel on first downs, 11 personnel, or just one tight end sets in general on third downs, as well as 2 tight end sets. So he was consistently on the field. He's the Chargers' clear top tight end. Tyler Conklin did not play an offensive snap this week. Would not be surprised if he is either not on the roster or healthy and active going forward for the Chargers. Even Will Dissly, who was the clear top tight end for Los Angeles last year, he was the third tight end. It was Tucker Fiskoff and playing in those run blocking situations or 2 tight end sets rather than Dissly. So Chargers have made some clear changes at tight end. I'm expecting Gadsden to have a big rest of the season. I think he'll consistently be on the field. We've seen Greg Roman's offenses feature the tight ends a lot in multiple stops, whether that was Mark Andrews in Baltimore, whether it was Vernon Davis with San Francisco. So the Chargers do have a lot of good receiving options. So the downside is there will be some weeks where it's the wide receivers who have the weeks and Gadsden doesn't. But Gadsden, this is a performance where, I don't expect him to get 160 yards again. I don't even expect him to get 100 yards again at any point this season. But I did move him up to a top 12 fantasy tight end over the rest of the year. So I would pick him up, keeping that in mind, even if you need a tight end this week. Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, Sam Laporta, all tight ends on bye week this week. So people will be fighting for Gadsden whether they need a tight end this week. They'll be fighting for him if they need a tight end long term. I would be fighting for him either way.
Yeah, that rostership at 2% right now, that's going to shoot up quite dramatically here in the next week. So yeah, Gadsden, definitely a fun one of our favorite rookie sleepers around draft time as well. And nice to see him kind of delivering here right 2 weeks in a row. So next up, we got AJ Barner of the Seattle Seahawks. He remains widely available as well. Played last night. How did things look for AJ Barner, Nate?
This wasn't the best game for him last night. The reason that he has been on this list is he is graded very well at tight end, and he has consistently seen the playing time. It was Elijah Arroyo who made a couple good catches this week, but it was still Barner who saw the vast majority of snaps, and Arroyo was mostly there for 2 tight end sets. Had a couple 1 tight end sets in there, but it's still pretty clear that Barner is the lead tight end in Seattle's offense. Like I said, has graded very well this season. His fantasy points per game is ranked fairly good. Went down a little bit after this game, but before last night was 10.3 PPR points per game, which is 15th among tight ends. Seattle has been a run-first offense. I expect them to continue to be a run-first offense. But I think Barner, based on how well he's played so far this season, could earn some more targets over the rest of the season. So if you're looking for more of that long-term option at tight end rather than specifically this week, I think Barner has the potential to have a good second half of the season.
Makes sense. A late addition to the list after Mike Evans broke his clavicle on Monday night. There's a little more of a room now for Cade Otton to get some work in Tampa Bay's passing offense, Nate.
Oh yeah, he was someone last year where his playing time has been great every single week, basically the last couple seasons now. He just doesn't consistently see the targets because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have so many good wide receivers. But we saw last year he was among the top 2 fantasy tight ends over a 4-game stretch when Mike Evans was hurt and Chris Godwin was hurt. And now Evans is expected to miss most of the rest of the season. Jalen McMillan isn't expected back for another week still, and Chris Godwin's missed the last 2 weeks. I think there's a decent enough chance that Godwin misses this week as well because the Buccaneers have their bye week the week after. makes sense to rest Godwin for another 2 weeks and hope that he is fully healthy. Amika Buka is playing through an injury right now. It was surprising to see him play at all last night. So the Buccaneers down several wide receivers. So we've seen the past 2 weeks, Auden has had good receiving weeks, 5 receptions for 51 yards in week 6, 7 receptions for 65 yards last night. So if you need a tight end specifically for this week, I would be happy to pick him up. The Saints are a fine matchup for him. So I could see Auden having a ton of targets this week. So if you miss out on Gadsden, or even if you are just need a tight end for this week and don't want to spend to get Gadsden just for a 1 week rental, I think Auden is probably your best option for this upcoming game.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, led the team in receiving yards last night, like you said, at 65 yards. And that was against a tougher defense as well in Detroit. So they're going to get some nicer matchups here than that going against, like you said, the Saints this week. But let's see. Colston Loveland also got a little bump in snaps this week, Nate, although Cole Kmet got hurt. But if Kmet is out, we could finally see a nice consistent snap share for Loveland here in year one.
Yeah, he's on this list for 2 reasons. One, his playing time went up in week 6. They started using him and Cole Kmet a bit more interchangeably, which was good to see. And then Kmet had that injury in week 7. A chance that he misses this upcoming game, so Loveland could be the every down starter this upcoming week. He did play 21 of the 23 final snaps in the game last week, so we do know that he would be the clear lead tight end if Cole is missing a game. So I think he's a good short-term option, as well as he has the potential to be the every down starter at some point later this season as well. Loveland has outperformed Kmet in receiving so far this season, or at least they've been pretty even on a per play basis. So I could see Loveland getting more and more playing time throughout the season, even if Cole is healthy again soon.
Absolutely. And then what do we got? We got the Ravens coming out of a bye week here. They'll be looking to hopefully figure things out offensively, which could hopefully mean more work for our guy Isaiah Likely here, because Mark Andrews hasn't done much with his starting role this season. So maybe we finally see Isaiah Likely worked in a little bit more this week, Nate.
Yeah, at least in their last game, we saw them use a lot more 2 tight end sets with both tight ends on the field. So Likely had more offensive snaps in their last game than he had at any point last season, which was good to see. A little bit of an interesting situation of what to do with Baltimore. Likely a chance he should be even higher on this list because of his potential. There is a possibility that Mark Andrews gets traded. He's in the last year of his contract. Is at an age where we expect him to be declining. He hasn't played well in these past few weeks, but they also haven't had Lamar Jackson, so I think that has also played into things. The obvious landing spot for Andrews was the Los Angeles Chargers because of his connection with the offensive coordinator. That seems a lot less likely now that Gadsden has put together 2 excellent games, so I'm not sure where Andrews would get traded to. So one, I pick up Likely, and the off chance that Andrews does get traded, there's a chance that he could end up with a team that wants him. But also the Ravens have an excellent schedule for tight ends over the rest of the season. So even if it's both him and Andrews, there's a chance that one or both of these tight ends could have some pretty big games over the second half of the season once Lamar Jackson is healthy.
Nice. I like it. Yeah, we'll see with Mark Andrews as far as trades go. I still like him, maybe like in Seattle or something, and he's got some connections there with some of the old Ravens coaching staff. But like you said, there's Seattle has AJ Barner. They got Elijah Arroyo as well, so might not necessarily be the best fit, but there's something out there. Hopefully. All right, and then lastly, Theo Johnson back after finding the end zone again this week. He caught 3 passes for 66 yards for the New York Giants. Nate.
Oh, yeah, he has been among the Giants' top receiving options recently, in part because they've had the wide receiver injuries. Malik Neighbors is out. Darius Slayton's missed the last 2 games. The Giants have been heavily tied to trade rumors. They've been aggressively looking for a wide receiver. I wouldn't be surprised if they add someone, in which case I'd expect Johnson's target share to go down. But if you are looking for a tight end specifically for this week, which some fantasy managers will, Theo Johnson, I think, is a perfectly acceptable 1 week option at tight end. I would also throw Dalton Schultz in there with Houston. He had 98 receiving yards, I believe it was last night. So had the second best game of his career. He is also an option if you need a tight end specifically for this week. But I would add the Giants and the Texans as two potential landing spots for Mark Andrews. So also teams that, yeah, their tight ends have been doing well because they've been getting volume, but I could also see them trying to upgrade at tight end because there could be a couple of tight end options available via trade over these next 2 weeks.
Nice. I like it. But yeah, that's going to do it. So thank you to everybody who tuned in. Again, good luck attacking the waiver wires this week. Obviously, going to be a big one with so many injuries and bye weeks here coming up. So make sure you're locked in and check out the work here at pff.com, powered by the best data collection team in the multiverse here at PFF. And Nate, as always, let everybody know what you got going on over on the site this week.
Sure. So I have the recap articles like up as usual. Have the usage and production report, which is where I go through the top 10 usage takeaways from the week, as well as have a bunch of filterable and sortable and tables that have a bunch of data. And that's how I often look at things when I'm writing my recap articles. I'm in that tool already looking for data, looking for different trends. So if you want to learn about any player that I haven't been writing about, that's one of the best ways that you can do that. Have the waiver wire article up if you want to look at it in that way. Also have 5 to add, 5 to drop, 5 to buy low, 5 to sell high. Rest of season rankings, rankings for this upcoming week, because that'll be big in helping decide who you want on the waiver wire as well. Then we'll have dynasty rankings. We'll have start sit on Thursday. And then we'll do it all again next week, where we will only have one Monday Night Football game and we will not have an early Sunday game. So also, if you've been going to our Discord and doing the start sit question and answer session there, that will be going back to 9:30 a.m. Eastern over these next 2 weeks now that we do not have that early Sunday game.
Yeah, nice to have a little bit of an opening there on Sunday mornings again. But yeah, make sure you go over and check that stuff out at pff.com and use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 to get 25% off. For me, IDP Fantasy Report, that's out already. That'll be updated with the Monday Night Football teams here very shortly. And it'll have all the snap shares for IDPs, waiver targets on defense, all those kinds of things. IDP rankings will be out soon. Wide receiver man zone coverage report will be out tomorrow. And the red zone report will also be out on Friday. So thank you all for checking that out. And again, promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25. Good luck in week 8. And until next time, peace out.